Good morning and welcome to today's event, Powering Europe's Future, here at Euractiv and brought to you by ABB, and a warm welcome to everyone joining online as well. I'm Jennifer Baker. I will be your moderator this morning, putting your questions to our great speakers. Now, today we're talking all about circularity for industrial competitiveness, which is, of course, as we all know, at the heart of the EU's new agenda as it transitions towards more sustainability. It's another key word we'll be hearing a lot of this morning. We're going to be talking about the Competitiveness Compass and the Clean Industrial Deal as the targets we're working towards. Now, circularity, I'm sure I don't need to tell the experts here in the room, focuses on the entire life cycle of many products, as well as the material use, reduction, product maintenance and servicing, as well as strategies such as reuse, refurbishment, remanufacturing and recycling. We're going to touch on all of those, as well as how to make circularity a business case, barriers to circularity, as well as the need to differentiate between needs for business to business and business to consumer. Today, we're going to take your questions via Slido. If we take a moment, you can have a look there on the screen. Please do scan the code, or if you go online to slido.com, you can insert circularity as your code. I think everyone has managed to do that here in the room. I'm sure those online have as well. So now, let me turn to our excellent speakers this morning. Joining us from the European Commission, I'm delighted to welcome Carolina de Cunha, who is Acting Head of Unit from Waste to Resources in DG Environment. Good morning. Sirpa Pietikainen is an MEP, substitute on the Environment Committee in the European Parliament, who will talk to us a lot about why she thinks sustainability is important. Heather Grab is Senior Fellow at Bruegel, recently written a paper just last year on circularity and how it should be looked at as a competitive tool. And Eric Laboda is Division President for Motion Services at ABB, a global technology leader in electrification and automation, but I will let Eric tell you more about what ABB do in just a moment. Carolina, let's start with you, as always, with the Commission. Set the scene for us and tell us what's the current state of play.
Yes, good morning. I think everyone has heard at some point that the Commission will issue a new Circular Economy Act, so it's probably not a secret to anyone. And indeed, if we look back a little bit to the political guidelines of this new college, the President announced that by the end of next year she will issue a new piece of legislation named the Circular Economy Act. And why is that? It's very clear, I think, to everyone why we want to go circular, but I will just mention three important aspects of this transition, which are economic security, competitiveness, and also decarbonization. And I think they're also very much on the agenda of this college. So why economic security? We know that our businesses rely very heavily on imports of materials from third countries, and therefore it is in our best interest to maintain the materials that we already have in our economic system for as long as possible in that system, be it through longer life of products or through better reuse of those materials and their recycling. And then competitiveness is also key. Circular practices help reduce costs for businesses, and is very important for especially manufacturing companies that typically spend more than twice as much on materials than on labor or on energy. So if we become more circular, then we will become also more competitive. And finally, decarbonization. We will not reach our decarbonization goals and targets if we do not go circular, because it is estimated that around 20-25% of greenhouse gas emissions can be achieved through more circular practices. So if we only look at these three goals, which are not purely environmental but very economic, that is very clear why we need to go circular. And of course, we heavily also rely on those flagship reports that were issued earlier this year or last year. So, the latter, the Draghi reports, the conclusions of member states from Budapest, from Antwerp. So all these goes in the same direction. Now, we will come back, I suppose, to the Circular Economy Act, so I will stop here.
Absolutely. Sirpa, when it comes to these big picture points of view, the Parliament is largely on the same page as the Commission. It's more about how do we achieve what we want as these targets. Tell us a little bit about what the thinking is at the moment.
Yes, gladly. And I started this work already when it was called resource efficiency, and was the rapporteur in 2008 on the first circular economy own initiative report in the Parliament. And the point of view is that let's face the facts. If we want to survive, we need to fit our economic system to planetary boundaries, full stop. It's a must. And that means totally different kind of an economic system where there is no waste. You design out of the waste, and you design the materials to be long-lasting and the products upgradable, reusable, fittable, and then on the longer line to come back on the system to use as materials. And those economies and businesses who get it will survive. Those ones who don't will not, and we are seeing already some of the consequences of not direction. And let's face it, circularity is the root on solving all environmental problems, believe me or not. CO2 is just a consequence of the economic use of materials. The biodiversity loss, big part of the chemicalization, you need to design out of harmful chemicals and so forth and so forth. And then the big challenges that we have been talking about in the Parliament throughout these years is you need targets, like you have in climate. There needs to be a cap on resource use sooner or longer, whenever that is going to be decided. We need to erase the obstacles, just to mention the waste framework directive that still is very much on silo on dealing when something comes to be waste. And it's not very effective and fittable for circular thinking. We need different kind of business ecosystems to work together. And we need it to get the finance, because you might have the best beautiful idea about what you can circle or do out of this glass. But if you do not have access to raw materials, if you do not have markets, if your product is always more expensive, you do not get funding and you do not get markets. So there should be regulatory requirements, but there should be incubators, there should be finance sources, and this comes to startup and scale-up strategy. This comes to whole competitiveness. So this is not only about the environment and how you regulate, like with Ecodesign directive, the products. It is what you finance, how you finance, and this comes to company reporting. How do you know companies are dealing with these processes?
We will get into some of the weeds on that in a few moments. But Heather, I mentioned at the outset you published a report last year. Give us the highlights, the brief synopsis.
Well, there's the why to go circular, and then there's the how. And I think the how we'll come on to a bit later, and it's quite complex. But the why is some fairly essential economic principles. There's the one of waste that Sirpa just mentioned, that waste is always costing money. It costs money to treat it and to deal with it and get it out of the environment. But it's also a waste of resources. And we in Europe are a resource-poor continent. We haven't thought of ourselves as being resource poor because we've always imported lots of resources. That's what the whole colonial economy was about. Countries in Europe went to other parts of the world in order to get their raw materials, their rubber, their timber, their gemstones, and import them back to Europe to build our beautiful cities. We can't continue that model. Not only is it inequitable, but also those countries have alternatives whom they can send them to. And volatile commodity prices and the rising cost of materials are a key problem for European competitiveness. Enrico Letta said in his report on the future of the single market last year about how volatile commodity prices and import dependencies are key strategic vulnerabilities of the European Union. We don't produce that many resources here in Europe. We've kind of got used to the idea in the past few years that actually fossil fuels are really, really expensive for us, and therefore we need other sources of energy. But we also need ways of extending the use and the life of the materials already in our system through urban mining and through circularity in order to maintain both competitiveness and economic security. And I think that the other thing to consider is thinking forward why we need to do this. It's because we need to consider in the longer term where are the comparative advantages of a resource-poor continent in an economy, a global economy, that will be suffering climate impacts. And essentially, it's going to get more expensive to mine because water becomes less available as the planet heats up. A lot of commodities are more difficult to grow, agriculture. A lot of things that we rely on for our industry, there will be more competition from China, from other, and rising economic powers. And so we can expect that the cost of our imports is going to go up pretty dramatically with climate change and increasing competition. And for that reason, we need to think longer term about how our comparative advantage could be to be the most resource efficient economy with companies that are really fantastic at durability, eco-design, doing the most with the least inputs and also making them maximum circular. That could really be a huge comparative advantage for Europe if we start investing in it now.
If we'd start investing in it even before now, I think probably we'll talk a little bit about timelines as well. Eric, let me come on to you. Heather said a little bit about the why. I know ABB works a lot on the how. Tell us a bit about what you do and set the scene for us.
Yeah, and first of all, thanks a lot for having the opportunity to speak as well here with my dear panelists and our colleagues. So my name is Eric Labuda, and we as ABB, we are basically at the forefront of industrial automation and electrification. And as well, the ones that are probably online, you see a slide a little bit around ABB. So ABB is a company that has been around in industry for more than 140 years, bending really the boundaries of what's possible. And as a global leader, it's not only our duty to push as well progress, but as well ensure that technology is really being adopted. ABB is, as a company, very strong European roots. So more than half of our employees are here based out of Europe. We are in 16 countries in Europe, coming in with a manufacturing side, having research centers where we really drive the technology angle forward. So many of you probably know the red ABB logo, and the ones that don't, actually we are the best kept secret, but you're in touch with us every single day. So the one here in the room that have been using the elevator, this elevator is usually being moved by some sort of electrical motor that pulls the elevator up. There is some software that is steering it so that it goes up smoothly. That's what ABB does. The one maybe online, you for sure have been washing your hands today, hopefully. Basically, the water pressure is coming out of the tap. It's powered basically by a pump. Again, this is electrified and powered by sorts of ABB. And the one that have maybe a nice delivery parcel coming, it's usually sorted on long conveyor belts in some sorting center. As well, those long conveyor belts is in some form automated by ABB. So pretty much everywhere that you can imagine, from industries around water pumping, over to logistics, over to food and beverage, processed food, but as well in heavy industries like cement mining and as well oil and gas. It's where we basically drive the agenda forward to a low carbon future. So now we came together to speak about circularity, right? And I think it's absolutely timely because, as Karina said, the Circularity Economic Act is now coming up. CEA is around the corner and will be the first proposal will be published already in the next year. So it's good that we come together and speak about that. And I'm a fan of statistics. So according to the Circularity Gap report that was published just this year, the circularity rate globally is at 6.9%. And going back, it's actually dropping. And that's something, of course, where we as Europeans, we can still say our circularity rate is at 12%, and by 2030 we want to double it towards 24. That's a huge mission we are on. Circularity is way more than just recycling. It's the complete shift to how we can change us as European companies to drive competitiveness, have superior product in the market that not only are the best products, but as well are built to last, are durable, and are not only good for the pocket, but as well are good for our planet because they are optimized in the minimization of resource waste. They are running at the best economic efficiency class. And at the same time, once they are end of life, we take them back, we recycle them and bring them into a secondary use. And that's in the end why circularity is so powerful. So for us in ABB, it's important that we bring up the topic of circularity, specifically the industrial circularity, high up on the EU policymakers' agenda. And we clearly see industrial circularity is something very different than it is actually a B2C or, let's say, circularity for consumer products. Yeah. It's way, way more complex. And that's why it's important to me that we have the opportunity here to speak and as well talk about adoption opportunities and how we can scale it, because that's what will really bring us as Europeans as well a big step forward.
Well, Carolina, let's continue along this question of what might be the issues that are faced by businesses. I know the Commission, there's always a consultation before anything is proposed. There's a focus on informing policy making, science-based or evidence-based. What are you hearing that are the problems that is being faced by industry in becoming more circular, and how can they be persuaded that regulation in this area is important and to their benefit as well for competitiveness?
Yes, well, we're hearing a lot of things, I must say, and also it's very good that you mentioned the public consultation, because it's actually running until the first week of November, and I would like to appeal to everyone here and online to take an active part in that. Yes, so it is very interesting to look at this context, from the B2B perspective and from the consumer perspective, because traditionally I come from the waste unit, waste to resources unit. So traditionally we were looking at how can we get the waste more easy from consumers and then channel it back to the economic cycle. But it's less visible probably in the context of businesses and also extremely important. So problems will be different, because there the streams are often clean. There we need more industrial symbiosis. There we need more maybe investments into innovative technologies. It's less about how to sort the waste into different bags approach. So for me it's very important to hear that also in this event, because as far as the proposal comes later, then of course I cannot say that much at this stage, but it would be very important to have these messages today. I think the big themes that are shaping up are related to extended producer responsibility for sure, where businesses also participate very actively through the fees that they pay for waste management and then for the management of the waste that results from their products. Then the whole idea of building a single market for secondary raw materials. Traditionally, waste is a national matter. We have seen governments fall because there was waste not collected in the streets. So it is a big responsibility. It used to be very, very much related to health and hygiene issues. Today, it's more an economic debate. It's more a commodity than a problem that needs to be managed well. So there has been this shift, but it is still governed by member states with harmonization at the European level. Now, do we need to have more harmonization? How much more to build this internal market or single market for secondary raw materials or for waste? Is waste actually suitable for the single market context? Because there are still going to be risks related to waste management, especially hazardous waste. So we don't want to freely let it circulate either. There needs to be a sort of a balance. But then having said that, we need to make sure that we all understand very well when waste ceases to be waste, for instance, so that it can then enter the area of the single market without any constraints. And it's understood in the same way in Greece and in Poland and in Germany. And those obstacles still exist. The same goes for byproducts, and I think that is very important for business-to-business relations, where some residues from business processes, from manufacturing processes, should be more freely exchanged without the constraints of being under the waste legislation. And this is something that we also have been faced with. So all these shipments, movements of secondary raw materials, that is another big area. And then finally, I think I would mention the topic of, there are several big crises going on. The recyclers of plastics are suffering through competition with materials imported into the EU, whether virgin or secondary. the steel manufacturing needs help. So it's a lot of discussions going on about sort of trade with third countries, and how do we make sure that our recyclers, that the investments that they have made in the EU into very advanced technologies to sort waste, to recycle it, to process it, then pay back, and that they can thrive, and they do not have to compete with secondary materials that are produced with much higher impacts in third countries. So there we are also looking at measures to stimulate the demand for those materials that come from recycling, especially that come from that originate from our waste. How to do that best? Well, we have different ways. We could look at public procurement, for instance. We could look at recycled content targets that we are now discussing in the context of end-of-life vehicles regulation, where we proposed a 25% recycled content target for plastics in all new cars. So a lot of things can be done, and I think will need to be looked at in the context of the Circular Economy Act.
Well, you've set out a lot of different areas that I want to drill down into individually, but Sirpa and Heather, let me come to you first and ask you to, Sirpa, talk about a little bit where we might see current regulatory gaps. Let's stay a little bit with the policy first, including the need to distinguish between B2B and B2C. And as Caroline mentioned, is this something that's fragmented? Do we have the level playing field, and where do we need to address this?
No, we do not have a level playing field. The existing system that is designed to be linear is actually punishing the circular companies and initiatives, and we need to see that. And to start, what we need to solve, and this is an appeal to all of you, please be in contact with politicians. The most hardest problem is the political climate at the moment. Because the political climate is saying less EU, less regulation, let us turn inside to our own cocoon in Finland or in Romania or where that in Poland, where that happens to be. And how do you sell it? How do you tell the story that, okay, no regulation, let's erase the property rights. Why do we have regulation to drive on the right or left side of the street? Let everybody choose what they do. What does it matter that 5% of people are driving on the wrong direction? The majority will do it okay anyway. And you couldn't create a linear economy and thinking a circular regulation. So that demands and needs changes in regulation and new regulation that, like the Circular Economy Act, because otherwise it's disincentivizing the existing regulation, the change, and it is an obstacle, surmountable obstacle in many cases in the pricing, what we can see of the recycled plastics, for example, at the moment. Okay, that is the biggest problem. Then, and the politics won't change because there are a lot of people saying, please do not touch, if we can't create that kind of a noise and voice for the change. Okay, then technically it's a lot of headache, but much easier. First of all, and this is the Achilles heel, the member states' competencies. And I have had several discussions with different industry fields. Who should collect and how, which materials, and always if you discuss with member states, well, let ABB with its consortium ecosystem, or let Coca-Cola to design the European system and how many collecting points and what kind of a plastics you can use in the same bin or you can't, or can you mix two companies' secondary material flows together, or you can't because then it messes up your processes and quality and all that. And member states say no. And then they demand regulation. Okay, you put it in standard. The heck I know how to design ABB's material flows. And so we would need to have a bit of a confidence for the business. And at the same time, not this kind of a rosy blind, okay, these guys will handle everything, because not everybody will handle everything, okay. So how do you put up the auditing systems, the regulations, that what is actually usable secondary material, how you avoid hazardous substances, how you check up that they are not dumped in Italy, for example, and promised to be used in Poland. And to put that kind of a framework there needs a lot of intellectual thinking, and I know that the Commission is on the way of doing, hopefully, this on the way, and that there's the political will for that. Then there's the urban mining. We talked 20 years about that. We should start it, but that's a long process too. You can't put civil servants to check all the slots. It needs auditing and licensing systems to put those operators on place. But you need to be extra careful, because you know that you can find whatever is human has made on those dumps, and so forth. And then it is the finance, it is the reporting, it is the targets, it is incentive, it is state aid, it is public procurement. You need to see it's not only one piece. This will solve it. It needs a lot of different actions, and hopefully in the roadmap with the Circular Economy Act, the Commission could come with this kind of a thinking, okay, please, these other actions are needed also.
Okay,
If I
yes.
may just quickly jump on that to add that we are not starting from zero, and by no means do we want to dismantle the whole system and just build it anew. So it is a big legacy that we have built. We have very many laws on waste. We have now the ESPR, so a regulation on product design. We have huge acquis that deals with chemicals. So all this has to come together, and we should not revolutionize this. I think the approach should be really to see where the bottlenecks are, where the problems lie, with your input, with the stakeholder input, and then try to fix those. So it should be, in my view, more punctual than just dismantling the whole thing, which I think that would also destabilize the system, because a lot has been done, and we also need some regulatory stability. That's important for businesses as well. So I just wanted to make that
Sure.
before I forget.
Yeah, very quickly, I didn't mean dismantling everything, but build on it, and it needs tweaking in existing regulation, but on top of it, it needs a lot. And I think that there we might have a bit of a difference on an ambition level, because I think that we do not have time to tweak it a bit here and there for 20 years.
Lego blocks.
That's true. I'm going to jump to Eric, because we're talking a bit about the business side, and Sirpa even alluded to the fact that some may want to say just leave this in the hands of private enterprise, but you work globally as well as across the different European countries.
No, absolutely. Look, and I couldn't agree more basically with Sirpa and as well with Carolina. For me, specifically the Circular Economy Act, for us, it's really about simplification and streamlining the good frameworks that we have, that were as well built with the right intentions, but sometimes still a bit contradictory to each other, right? Like the ESPR versus the WEEE. There are elements of it that are not complementary, a little bit contradictory. How can we really streamline them and align them so that we have something that is really unified? Because that's in the end the foundation that we need in order to not only have a clarity of the way forward, which we can then build on, but that's really as well about driving the innovation at scale. Now, Sirpa, what you said as well is the collaboration across the industries. Right? From an industrial perspective, I think we need some sort of guidelines in order to have as well a framework in which we can maneuver. And I always saying, I think if it's about the horizontal line, we probably want to keep it fairly thin, but we need, specifically in the industrial circularity context, we are pretty specific as well across the product and even across the systems. There we really need to look into the verticals of what do we really want to enable, what is as well the measures that we can apply, because otherwise we can drive as well up the complexity towards infinity. So it needs to be a guideline which is practical and therefore adoptable, and at the same time as well from a bureaucratic burden, try to be at minimise, and we talk a lot about the DPPs. Yes, we have to collect data, and if we don't measure something, it won't get managed, right? But we need to as well put it into a level that per each of the vertical of products, we collect the right data so that we can as well have a decision based on facts that are meaningful to the specific space of industrial circularity.
I should say it was actually one of my questions. In what ways can we harmonise the goals of the ESPR and the WE directive? So we're going to come on to that in a minute to see if we've got some ways we can talk about. But Heather, let me ask you about information gaps. And there are information gaps in the market for businesses seeking to buy and sell secondary inputs. We touched on that already. Catch up on what your colleagues have been saying and give me your perspective.
So, I mean, we tend to think, I work for an economics think tank, Bruegel, so we tend to think a lot about cost structures, and cost structures are important, and I think there are a lot of obstacles to setting the right incentives in terms of the cost structure. So there's the fact that taxes, for example, are a national competence, which makes it difficult to have harmonization of tax rates across the EU. Even the tax base is difficult to harmonize. And that means that you have problems like the fact that secondary raw materials have already been taxed once when they were sold the first time. Should they be taxed a second time? We need to have harmonization across the member states on that issue. You also need to have a clearer tax structure around things like rates of VAT. Would it make sense to have differential rates of VAT for circular products? That's complicated. Normally, national treasuries really hate having differential rates because it's more complicated to collect it. Or should there be special, we have special fees and levies on waste, but could there be other ways of lightening the tax burden on things like labour in the circular economy? So there are a number of different innovations on the tax side where the public sector could play a role in redressing the imbalance that Sirpa was referring to between the low cost of particularly imported virgin materials and indeed recycled materials made with lower environmental qualities. There is, of course, there have been proposals for having an emissions trading system for materials. This is pretty difficult at this point in politics when so much of the green agenda is under fire. So the idea of expanding things which are already being criticised is quite hard. But I think the other way to think about it is about the information gaps that you brought up, Jen, that it's not only about costs, it's also about companies knowing what's of value in their waste, or when they're doing restructuring, for example, if they're changing their plant downsizing, or if they're changing their production line, they may well have, for example, parts of ABB materials which they didn't know could be recycled, could be of value on the secondary market. And if, for example, they're a small or a medium-sized enterprise, what are they going to do with their ABB motor? Do they know that the components, where would they sell those? They perhaps don't have information. It's just too much hassle and too much expense to find out where they can recycle these things. And so this idea of which other businesses could use the materials that I don't need anymore, and also where can I get materials for the things that I do need. Now, there are two ways of thinking about this. One is you can actually set up industrial symbiosis by design. So there are some industrial parks, famously there's Kalundborg in Denmark, where you have companies that are set up in the same location who use each other's waste products as their inputs. Because if, for example, say you're running a data center, this is not the case in Kalundborg, but if you're running a data center that produces enormous amounts of heat, those could be used for a tomato farm next door, which needs heat for its greenhouses. But if you're producing, say, wastewater that is not super good quality, but it's good enough quality for another industrial process, that could go to a different firm that needs wastewater, needs water of lower than drinking quality. So that kind of industrial symbiosis could be explored a lot more. And I think one very good way to do that would be to have brokerage systems, to have something where you have a public authority or an independent platform, perhaps using AI, for example, which could match up companies that need particular materials or energy inputs or water inputs, and match them up with somebody else who is perhaps nearby or not too far away who could supply those. Or if literally an eBay for B2B, you say, well, look, I'm now switching to a different kind of automation system. what do I do with the components of the old one? And there have been some examples of this in member states, including in an ex-member state. In the UK, there was a government agency that was doing this. It's subsequently been closed down. But there are some interesting ideas of ways of doing this in an anonymous fashion where commercial data can be kept confidential, but where companies can really make use of each other's materials.
I mean, this is, in the energy sector, it's about co-generation and so on. I don't know, Eric, do you want to jump on this and to tell us from a business perspective, to what degree is this happening already, or are our thoughts already in that direction? And is it the missing link, as we're saying, the need for this brokerage, this information gap that is the bottleneck?
I think it's beautiful that the discussion's already going towards the direction. I must say, even though, of course, we have quite some frameworks in place, not all are basically fully yet complementing each other, and the Circular Economy Act, as we talked, will basically streamline a lot of these. Many companies are already acting towards the direction, right? Mm-hmm. Companies that work across the value chain, of course, ABB is one of these. To give a practical example, because as well as trading and the take back, yes, there is an information gap. For example, we just worked together with one of the leading players in the area of aluminium rolling and recycling. The company is called Novelis. We were looking at the industrial processes of that company, right? And it was about how can we drive up the energy efficiency and how can we extend the lifetime of the assets that are already there, or basically ensure that they are being replaced with the most energy efficient product. And then as well, what's happening to the old product, like Heather just mentioned. So together, we reviewed the whole value chain. We not only reduce the electricity consumption, which helps to take away stress from the grid, is helping as well to drive up the competitiveness because of a lower electricity bill. But at the same time, we as well removed a wide array, hundreds of electrical motors, in total more than 5 tons of electrical steel. The recycling rate is 99.4%. And this you can only do if you work with the customer, co-create. ABB as a company, as a supplier to that company, as well along the value chain, again, really collaborates again with recycling players, with logistics companies, but as well with our local expertise to not only exchange the product, but as well make the system in the end a little bit better. So that's one of those examples where I can say, yes, we are moving towards direction, but I think we can do way, way more, and we have to. And there is typically the 3 elements that all of you have been mentioning. It's, of course, the regulatory aspect, it's the financial aspect, and it's the collaboration aspect. I think the regulatory aspect we have stressed. I think we want to go on the right path. From a financial perspective, whatever we do needs to be economically viable. And so you mentioned this important fact. When I'm sourcing materials, how will I basically not be penalized by basically using a recycled material, which comes quite often at a little bit of a higher price tag than the virgin material? So this is all those things when we in ABB start to think about a product. We typically think, what will be the impact of that product? What will it mean in terms of footprint? And footprint is not only the materials that I have put in this certain device, but it's as well the electricity that will be used by this device over the course of quite often 20 years plus. So when I'm looking at, let's say, the public sector, total cost of ownership is a story we are yet usually not really talking too much about. Usually it's upfront cost. Procurement schemes are towards upfront costs. But if we look, it's taxpayers' money. We need to look more on the total cost of ownership asset, which has to have as well the circularity angle in. Something that is repairable usually can extend the lifetime. And if we extend the lifetime of something, usually it means as well a better ROI. So that's those elements which we need to watch even more carefully as well going forward. Solutions are widely there, but I think the collaboration happening still punctually, where companies are willing to see the benefits plus is not minus, but is really kind of something on top. However, we should be able to put a framework in place that drives this at scale. So it shouldn't be just the will of some few companies driving it and many companies moving towards direction, but we need to as well push more towards the frameworks in order to really bring us all at the same lane. And I think, I'm not sure who said it from you, majority will do it anyways. What do I care about the 5% that will drive the wrong way, right? Yes, however, the earlier we get to a certain framework that is stable, reliable, and as well predictable, the earlier we will go towards the same direction altogether. And I think if we want to increase the recycling quota to 24 from 12 by 2030, which is 5 years, it's not a long time, well, then we better act now.
I mean, I feel like saying for the collaboration part that, there should be an app for that. When we look at the consumer world, there are many options there. I mean, and maybe this is something to do with, on a macro scale, the business to business versus business to consumer elements. Now, I can see some questions are coming in online already. For those of you who have got your smartphones, do feel free to use Slido to send your questions to our panelists. We'll get to them quite shortly. But let me turn to you, Sirpa, again and ask, what sort of policy tools can drive these sorts of initiatives that we're talking about that need to happen across the policy sectors? I mean, what role can we see, if you like, in industry feeding back into the policy agenda so that it becomes a circular policy agenda as well, as rather than a top-down approach?
Well, I think that we just heard a beautiful example of that. And now we have the clean industrial deal, and we have different kind of support mechanisms. Even the budget is tight. Why couldn't Commission, in conjunction of this Circular Economy Act, suggest that the Commission would fund building this kind of a platform to business, to B2B and to B2C, where you can find, and then we would need anyway European AI to develop the existing AI systems to facilitate, okay, there's this kind of a raw materials, and there's this kind of a uses or used machinery or parts or whatever. And maybe it could suggest too that these guys, you should hook up and create this kind of a business park together. And this would be this kind of information guidance and wouldn't cost that lot. But to ask Finland to do it, I doubt. To ask ABB to do it just as a voluntary, I doubt that it will happen and fly. So it would need to have this kind of an initiative. Then, because I believe very strongly on this broker system, because that is the facilitator. Then the another one, it's politically a bit different, but we have to remember that the public procurement is the biggest slot of public money we are moving around in Europe. All the budgets count together. And if that is wrongly used, like nowadays quite often it is, because you buy the cheapest and if possible outside the EU because it is cheapest, you are creating not only a this kind of a neutral environment, you are creating negative push effect. But imagine if you would put that 17% of our GDP on pull effect, and that would be compulsory. I would suggest this kind of a comply or explain model. So it should be compulsory. And then in cases you could explain, okay, it's too complicated, we are so small, this slot is so special or whatever is the reason that you do not comply. And if that would be the signal, and having these together, that would make quite a big difference already. And then, as said, it is sort of removing the obstacles on another level, again, politically a bit difficult, but if you would cut down quite a number of subsidies in national level and in EU level, it would do good for our economies. Just mentioned the environmentally harmful subsidies like fossil fuel subsidies, fossil economy subsidies. And it would level the playing field in many cases. And there's a lot of these kind of initiatives that are, in my opinion, a low-hanging fruit that you could sort of pick in the same basket.
I'm going to give you a follow-up question, Sirpa, because it's come in, Julian Loughton-Weiss has said, and you alluded to it yourself about the political difficulties. They're saying many EPP members are heavily campaigning against sustainability-related regulations. How are you and others getting these EPP members to support the circular transformation? You said at the very outset that that was one of the problems.
Yes, indeed. And if you know, please tell me too. Trying different ways and means. But you know, I'm ignorant in many things in the world, and if no one explains them to me, I might have this kind of a flat world vision. So I'm not trying to downgrade my colleagues. Not all people are into circular economy and about environmental issues. They have life to live. They might sort of be interested about agriculture or local farmers or whatever that is. But in this case, they think that the world is flat. And what I'm doing, I'm trying to sell sailing around the world, and that is an obsolete idea, and it can be even dangerous because you might drop off the boat to what kind of a black hole. And then how you learn the thinking. And the most difficult there is that if I'm not interested, if I do not find it relevant, because security is relevant, economy is relevant, whatever my voters, my constituency is relevant, the angry SMEs are, and farmers are relevant, I do not tend to listen to someone coming, hey, I have a good idea about circular economy. Yeah, maybe tomorrow when we have time for that. And so how we change this attitude that is not hostile, it's just in a level ignorant, as I said, I'm ignorant in some other fields. And that's why I'm appealing you to contact all EPP colleagues and to explain because there's this kind of a false image that the environment is here, it is the bunnies and pandas and nice things, niceties when you concentrate, when you have nothing else to do. And then there's serious business like security and economics. And the economics, the bunnies are against the economics. And now it's not time for that. And sort of to turn it to economy and security talk certainly would help to understand that there's not contradiction, actually they are supportive to each other.
Speaking the same language probably helps.
It does usually.
Just quickly, I'll take another question from Ines Costa. I guess, Carolina, perhaps you could touch on it. What are the expected impacts from the upcoming Ecodesign regulation, CRM Act, Circular Economy Act? I'm going to throw in Digital Product Passport there as well. And are there concerns about pushbacks on any particular related policy instruments?
Well,
there's always pushbacks.
The impacts, I'm not sure I quite understand the questions. The impacts have been measured in the impact assessments, but I suppose what the question is a little bit more about what the effects would be of these pieces of legislation. So, well, yes, the eco-design, of course, that is a part of the puzzle. I mean, we can't get circular if we don't design products for circularity. So obviously that is essential. The ESPR is just a framework regulation, so it sets the mechanism to come up with those rules on how to design products, but then of course the devil's in the detail. So we will have to then do it for specific products, and this has to go hand in hand with circularity requirements, obviously, and with substance restrictions, obviously. So it's really going to be very important how these specific eco-design measures are then conceived and produced together with the relevant industry actors, because this cannot be done by us. We don't have access to the information as much as the industry has. So it will be a laborious process also. Let's not underestimate it, and a very important process, because in the end the way we do it will determine those impacts. Both on the price of the product, but also on the sustainability, on the circularity of the product. I think the question was about ESPR and
the question was about
also critical raw materials. Yeah, well, the Critical Raw
Act,
Materials Act, that is not within the area that I work on, because this is a piece of legislation that is governed, managed by our colleagues in DG GROW. But there again, access to critical raw materials is paramount, especially for digitalization, especially for decarbonization, so all these industries that we really are trying to push and promote. And yes, there is also a huge homework there, both on in the way we design products so that we can make those critical raw materials accessible after the product becomes waste. That is going to be central now in also the circular economy package that we will come up with. And you probably know that the Waste Electrical Electronic Directive is going to be revised as part of this proposal. So we will look into that there. So we need to design products in a way that critical raw materials are, first of all, maybe minimized. If we can replace them with something more accessible, less impactful, that is already good. If we can't, then, of course, we need to have access to those materials from third countries. So part of the Critical Raw Materials Act is also negotiating trade deals with third countries where we can get access. But then urban mining also, we need to get materials from what we have here in the EU already. Now the question is this economically possible? Because some of these materials are so much inside the products that it's very costly to take them out, verging on impossible sometimes. So design is important, labor costs are important. It's a very complex matter. But we could have a separate discussion on that topic, I believe.
Indeed, at Euractiv we actually have.
May I just react to also what Sirpa said? I think, I worked also on biodiversity, so the pandas and so on. But I think the circularity agenda, at least from my perspective, is easier because it is about competitiveness. It is about economic growth. So it's not just purely about the environment. It is, as I said at the beginning, essential for our security, for our competitiveness, for decarbonization. So in that sense, I think it's easier to promote this agenda with all political parties on the political spectrum, from my perspective. But Sirpa has much more experience with that than us.
Not everybody feels so yet.
Heather, you want to jump in, and then I'll come to Eric.
I have no doubt that once, at the moment, everybody loves circularity. At the moment, there's not very much political pushback on the overall idea. Once you get down into the how and into the specific regulations, there are, of course, going to be incumbent industries who have their own ways of doing things now, who will be disadvantaged by a move out of linearity and into circularity, and they will complain. And there will be lots of lobbying in Brussels. This is what always happens. This is what has happened at every stage of every transition. But I think to prepare for that and to think about what this might mean for the European economy over the next decade, we should think about two aspects we haven't talked about this morning. One of them is the way that this can drive enormous innovation. Mario Draghi said, for competitiveness, we need to innovate a lot more in Europe. We need to spend more public money on innovation, but we also need to allow startups to become scale-ups. We need to provide the access to finance as well as removing barriers. And a lot of that innovation happens in the circular economy. A lot of it is SMEs. But the other side is labour. The fact that a circular economy can create a lot of jobs. I've just been involved in a study that's about to come out by Circle Economy and a number of other think tanks, academics and businesses who have been looking at how many jobs could be created in a circular economy. And this is a tricky thing because a lot of these jobs are not kind of counted now. They're small repair shops, small tailors, often informal work as well, particularly in waste collection. We still see quite a lot of informal economy there. But if you look at it quite comprehensively and think about what are partially circular jobs and so on, you come up with a really astonishingly large number of jobs that can be created. I won't kind of release the headline numbers ahead of the launch of the report, but watch out for that because the job creation potential is large. You are in a moment when we're very anxious about AI taking out a lot of jobs. The circular economy involves a lot of manual work, not only low-skill manual work, but very high-skill manual work, craftsmanship, everything from tailoring to making precision equipment and so on, which still involves the human being, and also at local level and employment, which keeps allows people to stay in their homes rather than having to move for work. So let's think about those aspects too, because that that can appeal to different parts of the political spectrum.
Eric.
Just a quick remark as well from the industrial perspective. I would like to second the view as well that Carolina made. For me, we talk a lot about as well access to rare earth materials, magnets and all those sorts of things. Typically, you know, when we drive towards innovation, it's about being less dependent on such materials. So as well, from an ABB perspective, we developed an electrical motor, which is coming completely without magnets, no rare earth materials. This technology exists as we speak today. And when you go typically to the consumer side of things, you buy yourself a fridge, you see those A, B, C, D ratings. This motor is coming with an IE5 rating. That means A+++, basically. So that's the most energy efficient solution that's on the market. Again, coming a bit from the upfront cost, it's a little bit more expensive in the beginning, but from a total cost of ownership, payback times 2 to 3 years. So it's one of those, let's say, typical technology aspects where technology is already there, but yet it's not really widely adopted. And that brings me back to the point where I said, while we go on circularity, let's don't run into the trap that we treat industrial circularity same like the B2C or consumer circularity. We need to be very careful along those buckets, what type of products, and let's pick up the biggest levers. One big lever, at least from an industrial aspect, typically half of the world's electricity is consumed by some sort of electrical motor, something that moves things. In a building, it's half of the electricity used exactly by something like this for the heating, ventilation systems. In large industrial manufacturing, it's on the conveyor belts and on the machines that process something. So these type of products that are the biggest levers, I would suggest from industrial perspective, let's tackle them first and find some solutions on how we want to address them. And then we go step by step, lever by lever, and define what makes sense specifically to that bucket. That's something that I feel would help industry quite a lot to do their step into the right direction, have a clear guideline, and then basically really go for the, let's say, innovation at scale within that bucket.
I see quite a few questions coming in. Some, I think, a follow-up asking about what you do to convince the bunnies and the pandas people and how you get them to work together. I think we'll park that for now. But perhaps one that's more interesting, maybe Heather or Sirpa for you. Does Europe have the capacity to build truly circular value chains alone? If non-EU businesses are needed, will their role be a peripheral consideration or an integral consideration in the circularity framework? Sirpa, your thoughts, and then I'll ask Heather as well, your thoughts on that.
No, of course we cannot. We are not living in this kind of artificial bubble or own planet. We need always the fresh new resources, raw materials, the renewables or non-renewables. Some of them need to be exported, and there's not anything wrong about that, and not even to create a global ecosystems, because in some materials and products you need a total global network to make the business case and to make it function. But the point is that you can create it, I don't know, you probably are better aware of that, 70-80% of internal circularity, and that's enough. That is one point. Then two positive comments. One that I forgot to mention because it's so effective is deposit system. Because by that way you can guarantee, and then when we are talking about extended producer responsibility, I think it should be always combined with rights. Because if that is your material, it's making a long run before it comes back, for example. You need to be certain that you get your pallets or motors or whatever back. And there needs to be that kind of a guarantee systems that we do not have. And the last point, and this is about positive lobbying, that is needed very much. For example, the example of the positive lobbying was this product passport ages ago. It was the industries that came with the idea to me, and I didn't sort of get it first. Why do you need this kind of a stuff? And then, of course, I did understand after quite a number of explanations, because you can't create circularity without the knowledge what materials here and there and how to handle and chemicals and all that stuff. So now, after a long fight, 10 years in the Parliament and Council, we got it. And it is under the threat of extinction at the moment, because it's felt in many parts in member states, in some industry associations, companies, and in politics as useless extra administrative burden. So sometimes you would need to step up and defend something that you wanted and you got it, and not to sort of think it is there and it stays there, because you might make these kind of mistakes in politics that then you just erase it, and then oops, after a while you notice what you did, a bit like what happened with the Brexit.
Heather, we won't get you to comment on Brexit, but we will get you to comment on that question.
I'm sorry, didn't want to make you bleed.
This is bringing to the fore these questions about global interaction. I mean, I also see another question here from Eric Prudhomme saying, are there jurisdictions more advanced than the EU in industrial circularity, or is Europe going to lead? Is it expected to lead? How do we, if you like, square the circle or circle the square between bringing in all these other parts of the absolutely essential long supply chain?
I think these are vital questions, because there tends to be a narrative now in political debates that it's only Europe going sustainable, and it's going to be enormously costly to us because we're the only ones and everybody else continues with the old methods. This is simply not true. Other jurisdictions, other countries, other regions have realized just how expensive waste is for their economies. They too have big problems with plastic mountains, with landfill, with hazardous waste, all these kinds of things. So the cost of waste is there. And also there's innovation going on in other parts of the world to produce more efficient products, because for them too, the cost of inputs goes up. The cost of energy is still high in many places. I mean, it's higher in Europe, but it's still there as a cost, but also the cost of the materials themselves, including the critical raw materials. China has got the monopoly in many areas, particularly on processing of critical raw materials. And yet China itself is trying to increase the more efficient use of materials. China is investing in the circular economy. Mm-hmm. There's lots of regulation in China to drive towards circularity, to reduce waste and also to increase durability, because they know that that's essential for their own competitiveness and their own economy. So I think it's nonsense to imagine that this is just something that Europe is doing for its own sake. There are tricky issues around global circular markets. So they're the ones that we've been discussing about the quality of materials. Can you be sure that the secondary materials that are in circulation globally have got the right standards? They shouldn't be hazardous, they shouldn't be polluting, and so on. There are also issues around, for example, should we export our scrap steel or should we ban the export of scrap steel? That's a very live issue at the moment, because scrap steel is becoming more valuable. It's something that Indian steelmakers would like to have, as well as European ones. This is a very tricky one because that relates then to a lot of strategic issues around the future of steel. There are also tricky issues around our trade relationships, which will change if we have more both B2B and B2C circularity. We will be importing fewer super cheap linear goods, which are highly environmentally damaging, but we might be importing more goods, which are intermediate goods with a high amount of secondary raw materials. So those kinds of relationships change the sorts of trade agreements that we both want to have, and also the trading relationships we have. So I was involved in a project called the International System Change Compass a few years ago, which was launched actually here as well at Euractiv. In that report, we went into all the details of how it will change the EU's relationships. But the overall net positive for humanity is that you've got less cutting down of forests where the pandas, breed. You've got less extraction from nature, which is hitting the planetary boundaries globally. So I think this is not Europe versus the rest. It's Europe with the rest of the world. It can be a global thing, but it also needs quite careful planning and regulatory management in order to make that a success for all.
Well, I see a question here from Marcela Mantilla, asking quite specifically, how can transparency and traceability be improved for metals used in grid equipment, for example, recycled content and origin, and what conditions are required for developing the industrial basis for high-quality recycled metals for grids. That's very specific, but Eric, perhaps you could speak to the importance of traceability and transparency in general.
I think when you look at the overall supply chain, I think traceability is a nice idea at the very beginning. However, once we go into practice, traceability until what point in the chain? And I think this is now a topic which I think from an overall perspective is extremely important, that traceability is something that we need to embed at some point across the value chain. However, we as well need to start at the first secondary suppliers. Like Sirpa, you said yourself, secondary material. It's not that difficult depending on the material category. In some product categories, it's again very difficult depending on how many stages are in between. So again, the one-size-fits-all approach will not be applicable to that. I just can give you an example of what we do in ABB. I mean, we built ourselves as a circularity framework, and our aim is to have more than 80% of our product under the circularity framework. What is the typical topics? I mean, in the end, it's not only about the traceability, but before you even start tracing material, you need to design a product that is compact and is minimized in terms of resources used at all, right? Low amount of steel, less amount of copper, low amount of plastics. This is the first steps is design. Before you even start the tracing, then, of course, come the ethical sourcing point. Tracing, what type of materials, what source, how traceable is it, what it's coming from. Another dimension, of course, while you design the products, you need to design them in a way so that they are built to last. Heather, you mentioned repairability, one topic, retrofitting, extension of lifetime typically. And then, of course, no matter what, when we in the European context, we need to be competitive. So the product, no matter how you design it, needs to be competitive. And not only from a performance, but as well from a price perspective, right? And last but not least, ideally, I mentioned the Novelis example, there must be a take-back mechanism, right? There must be a recycling mechanism. Yeah. I mean, in ABB, for example, we give our customers credit so that they can buy with the credits out of the recycling their next products that are more energy efficient. Is this scalable? Well, within the ABB world, yes. But is it scalable across the whole industry? No. And I think this is then something where, again, we're coming to the regulatory aspect. You mentioned the brokerage or the brokerage aspect. These are those points which are enablers towards that. If they are done in a way that is, from a bureaucracy perspective, low, and from a, let's say, data collection perspective, feasible. And that same applies as well to the traceability topic.
I'm going to take two last very quick questions, Carolina, specifically to you, to the Commission. Stephen Fleming wants to say that co-processing industrial waste offers a key tool towards clean and competitive transition for the cement industry. What is your view on explicitly recognising this solution in the CEA? So I guess co-processing of industrial waste. Gianmarco from Wind Europe wants to know, how will the Commission make sure that the updated WEEE framework applies appropriately to large, long-lived industrial equipment where producers may not have control over end-of-life management? I know those probably take a lot of time to answer, and I'm going to ask you if you can very quickly give a quick response to both of those.
Yeah, co-process, I mean, depends what recognition in EU laws would mean. It's there, co-processing is there, it's a recognized industrial practice, it's not forbidden, it is part of a waste management system, so if there's a need to do something legal about it, then I think I would invite that specific input. But yes, industrial waste is used in cement production with good energy efficiency gains, so that is already happening. If there are any obstacles to that, that would be interesting to explore further. I mean, this is also a way to eliminate industrial waste that contains certain substances that have to be incinerated, that cannot be processed otherwise. So, yeah, this whole discussion about incineration of waste or energy recovery from waste is also part of the debate, but maybe not to such a huge extent as the attempt to promote the higher levels of the waste hierarchy, because we have the waste hierarchy in place. I don't think there is a need to really discuss this hierarchy and its different levels. This is at least not the input I have heard so far. It remains valid for most, I would say, and co-processing is already there at a certain level. So I would say leave it at that for the time being. So we will see how we get into that discussion once the stakeholder input is there at the beginning of November. And I welcome that input also online.
Okay, and any thoughts on end of life in the WE framework? Is there any consideration for those who cannot have control over the end of life of their products, I suppose?
Oh, that was a question to me. I thought that was a question
well.
to...
No, it was, well, unless anybody else wants to take it, it's from, specifically towards the Commission. What can you do?
So the question was how we can consider...
How can you make sure that the WE framework applies to those long-lived industrial equipment where producers don't necessarily have control over end-of-life management? Mm-hmm. Not time to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that is really a rather specific question.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of input for long life equipment specifically would be very interesting in the context of the revision of the WE directive. It is true that the WE legislation is, maybe not necessarily conceived for shorter living products, and longer living products, of course, have this challenge that then the design changes and maybe the product comes back onto the market and it's not so fit into the legislative landscape that has evolved in the meantime. But I would need to understand a little bit more the background of that. What I think is important now for the WE, for those interested in and active in the realm of the electronic equipment, is the scope of this legislation, which is too narrow for the reality that we're facing. So I think we need to look into what needs to come into the scope. And that involves also larger equipment that is out in the market and that has not been present as much, had not been present as much when we conceived that legislation several years ago.
Eric, you can tackle this question, and I know we're running very short of time, so I'm putting pressure on.
Just a very small remark as well to Karin. I think it's a very specific question indeed. However, specifically on the electronic parts in the wind industry, there are options for upgrades and retrofits to extend the lifetime of this. That's, by the way, always not only the economically best, but as well environmentally the best way forward to extend the life. There are options to do that. However, of course, now we would need to understand a bit more specifically what the case mentioned is. In a nutshell, options are there. Typically, players that do those retrofits as well take care via some local recycling company to bring it back into the circularity. The circularity quota, again, is depending on the product.
I think we'll go to a final wrap-up now. So, I mean, our overarching question that we were trying to answer this morning really was, what should be the big key elements included in the simplified Strategic Circular Economy Act that really will promote the circularity and also take account of the business-to-business considerations versus the business-to-consumer considerations to incentivize more circularity, but also those innovations that Heather mentioned. So I think perhaps, Sirpa, let's hear from your perspective in a brief nutshell what you want people to take away, what you want to see coming forward.
Yes, to remember it needs other parts of the legislations too that we discussed. To remember it needs to be done to last, not gradual process. I know that the Commission prefers that, but to give the legal certainty for products to be designed for 20 years, it would need to be ambitious enough, and that goes to this very sensitive discussion about targets. And it would need to have the extended producer liability and rights. It would need to have the information guidance, the linkage on reporting on product passports, and on standardization auditing systems. So that it really sort of secures, and to give always the priority to material use on this comply or explain model, then it would leave the waste directive and waste more, not less important, but aside to treat what really is waste, and to deal this as part of the streamlining the resource use in normal economy.
Carolina, a quick takeaway or look ahead from you?
We cannot have a one-size-fits-all legislation because we live in a very complex world, and waste and secondary raw materials are very complex. So what I think we need at the European level is something simple, operational, implementable, and very clear. Now, that might require specific approaches for different businesses. Whether or not that should be EU regulated, I think we need to discuss. There are also ways, such as, for instance, those platforms to exchange information, maybe secondary legislation, delegated implementing acts that could apply to those specific areas. But if we overcomplicate and then have to revise to simplify, I think that also deregulates the business. We need some basic stability, basic clear rules that promote circularity without over-regulation, but also without deregulation, because we need all this resource efficiency being promoted, and we need environmental protection and decarbonization. So it's an impossible mission, as always, for us to strike the right balance. But please.
You are used to it in Commission.
Yes, indeed.
Eric, a quick takeaway from you?
Look, I think three things. Number one is, of course, to act on circularity, the time is now. I think we talked about the circularity quote that is going back. In Europe, we're still at 12%. We want to get to 24%. So if we want to get there, we need to see it not only as something nice that we do for only the environment, but it's really a competitive driver for us here in the European Union. It's as well basically an important aspect of resilience. The more we can build our products in a way that we use more recycled materials, the less us as an importer of raw materials, we get dependent as well on the outside of the European Union. So it's an important resilience factor. Second, so if we see circularity not only as this material concept, but really as a competitive and total cost of ownership view, it's really about the industrial scale of circularity. And the key takeaway for me is that don't fall into the trap that circularity from a consumer perspective is the same like industrial circularity. We really need to have a tailored approach, and we need to think along the biggest bucket, not only product, but even system. And it will only go via two things, via clear framework and via collaboration. Frameworks, of course, simple, low degree of bureaucracy, but as well clear incentives, right? Clear tax incentives, as well clear direction for multitude of years forward, so that the industry can as well invest into the right innovation buckets. And of course, then on the industrial side, it's all about collaboration across the value chain. There is many good things happening, but we need to do way, way more.
Heather, I'll give you the final word.
So I think the way to go forward is really to think about it as resource productivity. We've had a lot of focus on productivity as the big component of competitiveness. This is the side of productivity that has been neglected by Mario Draghi. So let's fill out what Mario Draghi's agenda put forward for the future of the European economy, particularly given that with global trade turbulence, the need for strategic autonomy and less import dependency has got bigger. So those are that's the big global context and that we need to be aiming for in terms of the economic reasons for circularity. And when it comes to the legislation itself, absolutely needs to be streamlined, but it needs to be durable legislation. It needs to be setting a framework that will incentivize companies to move in the same direction for the next 20, 30 years. So it can't be chopping and changing and being suddenly stuck into an omnibus in 5 years' time. That's just going to make a total mess for businesses that have already invested, and it rewards the laggards and it punishes the front runners. This is exactly the wrong incentives to set for European business. So I think what the Circular Economy Act now could really focus on is we've got already a lot of legislation on end of life, on once materials have reached a point where they need to be reused or moved into recycling because they can't be reused any further. We've done some work on the start of life, which is around eco-design and making sure that products are designed for durability, repairability, and so on. Now it's the middle part that is the most difficult, but which is really essential. It's not, beginning of life, end of life, we've got some very good building blocks of legislation. This middle part of how the materials are used in the economy, how they can be given a second, third, fourth life by moving from one business to another, how businesses themselves can plan for their products to be used multiple times and in multiple ways. And it's not just products. I mean, Eric just said it's about systems. It's also about things like in public procurement. A building can be reused several times for different uses, and it would be cheaper, much cheaper for a public authority to build something which doesn't have to be knocked down and rebuilt every 20 years, but can stand for 100 years and be reused 5 times for different things. So that middle part of reuse and extending life through also the business-to-business industrial circularity, I think should be a core component.
Thank you very much. Thank you indeed to all our speakers and to everyone for sending in all your questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to all of them. I mean, we're 10 minutes over time already. We could have probably gone for another hour, but thank you very much for your thoughts and insights. And remember, you can find out more information on Euractiv debates on events.euractiv.com, or you can continue the conversation using the hashtag EA Debates. Thank you all once again and have a great day.